Regrets. We all have them. Sometimes they might be relatively small, sometimes they can be pretty big. And I recently recognized what my biggest regret is, and it kind of surprised me a little bit. And today I want to talk a little bit about that regret, and if it's something that you can relate to, kind of walk you through a little bit of a practice to help you hopefully lean into moving through that so that you're not finding yourself years later having the same type of regret. Welcome. I'm Peggy Oliveira. Thank you for joining me. It was interesting to me to recognize this regret because the things associated with it I've been aware of for a very long time. And I'm not quite sure what made me think of it in this particular way. I actually think it might have something to do with I'm going through and kind of editing and proofing the inner child workbook that I'm working on. And so I suspect actually that might be where it might have come from. But I recognized that I really do think that this is my biggest regret in my life is parenting from a place of fear. Now, this video can still be applicable to you whether you're a parent or not, because it's not just about parenting. This actually could be in a lot of different areas of your life, and in particular, when it comes to any sort of relationship. So a romantic relationship, a parent-child relationship, a friendship, and even like a career type of situation. But anything that is associated with coming from a place of fear. And as we've talked about before here, fear can show up in virtually every area of our life. And an interesting thing about it, which is true for a lot of things, is that we may not recognize it, identify it, or even potentially feel it as fear. So as I was thinking about it, I was thinking about different pieces, like different experiences that we had together when my kids were young, and recognizing just how many decisions I made, how many are the ways in which I showed up as a parent, and that fear was often underlying that. And so if you think about your relationships or think about the things that you want to be doing in your life, recognizing the impact that having fear around it can create. So with parenting, for me, I had a lot of fear around not being good enough, not being capable, and ultimately that those things were going to lead to screwing up my kids. And also that they deserved more because I wasn't good enough. And so ultimately that really was about this fear of being a bad mom, which in turn was going to leave lasting, devastating effects for my kids. And I wasn't necessarily consciously always thinking, I'm afraid I'm going to screw up my kids, or will this decision impact them for the rest of their lives? I wasn't necessarily consciously thinking about that, especially when they were younger. But as we've also talked about here, the things that are not specifically conscious can have even more impact. And so every time, every day, every single day, there was this fear that impacted how I felt generally, certainly how I felt as a parent, impacted decisions that I was trying to make, whether it was a bigger decision or a spur of the moment decision. It would cause me to doubt pretty much every decision that I made. And it also really impacted my ability to create an environment that was really clear in terms of expectations, consequences. I think the expectations probably were a little bit more clear, but I really struggled with consequences because I would question myself. So I'm not necessarily going to get into all of that. I really want to talk about the fear. So in a romantic relationship, for example, fear can dictate so many different pieces of that. Who you allow yourself to be in relationship with. Whether you allow yourself to be in a relationship. How you tolerate or don't different types of behaviors. And when I say that, I'm not talking about things that you should or shouldn't tolerate specifically, just in general. It's certainly fear is connected to our ability to feel safe and trusting. Also contributes to our ability to, or our lack of ability to feel secure in a relationship. And that can play out, look, a lot of different ways, from being what you might consider kind of like needy, to being on the opposite side of that, to being really aloof or disconnected, avoidant. And obviously we don't want to be on the far end of either side of that, right? We want to be able to be more in the middle, generally speaking. And so in talking about this today, recognizing just how significant fear is, and we have definitely talked about this before. And I can say that for me, when I look back on how I parented, and I'd like to be able to say that that doesn't play a role anymore. Can I? I mean, obviously the parenting changes when your children are adults, but I don't know that I could fully say with 100% certainty that fear doesn't still show up in some of my parenting. I don't think that it does, but typically we're not necessarily going to be really aware of it at the time. But I know that it did early on. And so the regret comes from recognizing the impact of living with that fear, the impact that it had on me, and also the impact that it had on decisions that I made or decisions I didn't make, and how my anxiety potentially impacted my children. Now, whether that is from them experiencing my down and anxiety, or decisions that I might have made based on that fear and anxiety and doubt. So recognizing how fear might be showing up. And one way that you can kind of think about, okay, how much fear or how much is fear playing a role in this aspect of my life? So it could even be like deciding to go out with friends or making new friends. It could be about your work or your career. It really can show up in a lot of ways, but recognizing, do you worry a lot? Do you find yourself playing things out? Do you worry that you're not going to be doing it right, or it's not going to be good enough, or is somebody upset? Do you doubt and question yourself a lot? And I know as parents in particular that it's fairly natural to question and maybe even doubt yourself to a degree. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The problem comes from like if it's coming from a healthy place and you're questioning, is this the right decision? Are you able to be with that discomfort, sit with it, and recognize, why am I feeling this way? Why am I leaning towards this decision? Or whatever the case might be. And if you can be with that and come to a conclusion that feels okay, feels somewhat a sense like you have a sense of peace around it, that you are able to trust it to a degree. If those things are in place, then it's likely not so much that you're living or parenting from a place of fear. But if, regardless of the decision that you make, you're still questioning and doubting yourself, and again, this could apply to anything, there's a good chance that you are just living and acting from that place of fear. So I'd like you to just maybe take a moment, maybe even pause the video and think about different aspects of your life and recognize, are there different aspects, and maybe it's all aspects, or could just be one in particular, where you recognize that you tend to doubt or question yourself a lot, or worry about what you're doing or how you're doing it or what the outcome will be, or obviously depending on the circumstance is going to be different. What do you notice? Does that tend to show up? And really, this could be virtually any area of your life, decisions that you're making that don't necessarily have to have significant consequences. Because as we've talked about before, fear becomes so ingrained. It becomes, in a sense, not technically does it work, but it can become, particularly worrying, this sense of control in the outcome, which is not accurate. That is not the reality, but that's what happens. That's what's happening in our system to try to feel like we have more power than we might actually have. So recognizing, is there an area in which that might be the case? And this could even be like with sharing your opinion about something, sharing your desire about something. Is there something in particular, whether it's a particular type of opinion or desire, or maybe a particular group setting or person where you tend to hold back? Because particularly if there's worry that you recognize specifically, or doubt, fear is underlying that. So if you have something in mind, then you can consider that particular thing. If nothing in particular comes to mind, but maybe you recognize that there's something that you'd like to do, you'd like to see happen in your life, but it hasn't happened yet. Take a moment and consider, if I wasn't afraid, what would I do? Now you might say, well, if I wasn't afraid, what decision would I make? If I wasn't afraid, would I choose this? If I wasn't afraid, would I quit this job even without something lined up? Or if I wasn't afraid, would I go after that dream job that just opened up? If I wasn't afraid, would I send that text message to whomever about whatever? If I wasn't afraid, would I feel more ease on a day-to-day basis when I'm parenting? Would I feel more ease in my life generally? So there's a lot of different ways that you can take this, but if I wasn't afraid, then what? And again, maybe you pause this for a moment, or maybe you finish watching it and just come back, but really let yourself think about that. Doesn't mean you have to go out and do it. This is just about recognizing the fear and being able to do some things to move through it. Okay. So I don't want you to get wrapped up in, okay, I'm recognizing this and now I have to go do it. Nope, we're not there. We are just acknowledging where that fear might be and how it's showing up and what it means in our lives so that we can then do things to help move through it. So if I wasn't afraid, and if you have difficulty, like if there's a part of you that's saying, well, I'm not afraid, and maybe you're coming up with other reasons why you're not doing it, that might be an aspect of resistance to fear, and it might be a rationalization so that you can continue to put that thing off. It doesn't have to be, but sometimes that's what's going on. So you might not recognize I'm afraid, but you might recognize that you come up with reasons. You find reasons as to why it hasn't happened or isn't happening, or you're not doing the thing you want to do, whatever it might be. And that's not to say that there aren't sometimes some very real things that can be in the way. This is just about kind of noticing, right? So identifying that. And if you are somebody who writes things down, who journals, maybe even take a few moments, get the journal and write, if I were not afraid, I what? If I did not worry about what? Right? So maybe the word that you use might be different, but I think you probably kind of get the idea here. And if not, then leave a question in the comments and I can try to explore that. I'm working on getting back into replying. So that's kind of the first step. And I think it is helpful to focus on one thing at a time. So like one area in your life. So whatever that might be for you. Maybe it's trying a new hobby. Like it doesn't have to be something really big. But think of just identify something and focus on that for this. So you've recognized in what area that might be. Now, what if it turned out okay? Or what if it turned out better than I could imagine? Or, and this I think is probably going to be the most significant for a lot of people, what if it was safe to do this thing, to make this decision, to say that thing? What if it was safe? Now you might be saying to yourself, well, I'm not worried about my safety. Well, the truth is that fear and that fear holding us back or causing us to doubt ourselves, that fear is because we do not feel safe. So that safety may be a conscious thought, like it's not safe to do that thing. Oftentimes, it's not a conscious thought. It's a feeling. It's a nervous system response. And sometimes it can look different for different people. It can even look different depending on the circumstance. But it might be your heart rate increases. It might be that you notice feeling tense. Your breathing becomes more rapid. Or maybe you stop breathing. Maybe you hold your breath. Maybe you notice feeling kind of tingly or numb. Maybe you notice feeling agitated. Like there's really a lot of ways that it can show up. So for the purpose of this, just let yourself use that phrasing, that term in particular. What if it were safe? And you don't have to identify specifically what that means for you right now. Just, what if it were safe to do this? What if it were safe to trust myself? And so in my example, from my experience that I shared, as a parent, whether it's your day-to-day stuff or you've got to make a big decision, what if it were safe to trust myself? What if it were safe to trust my intuition? What if it were safe to trust what I think is right? What if it were safe to let go of the doubt? So I would encourage you to maybe just take a moment here as well to just notice what might have come up with that idea of what if it were safe? And again, you don't have to know in what way it might be safe. Just what if it were safe? And I think that this is the idea of safety, I think, is such an overlooked part of being human, honestly, but certainly in regards to healing. Because there are so many different reasons that some part of us may not feel safe in a lot of different types of circumstances and moments. And that's true without a history of trauma. When you add in a history of trauma, it's compounded. So sitting with that idea of just noticing what comes up around that idea of safety. Because the reality is, for most people, in most circumstances, when you are living your everyday life, so I'm not talking about something out of the ordinary that comes into your life that you have to make a quick decision about that's potentially dangerous or something like that. I'm talking about living your everyday life. When you can recognize that a lack of safety, in whatever way that's showing up, might be playing a role, might be creating some hesitancy, some doubt, some unease, even connecting you back to a sense of unworthiness or being undeserving or not enough. There's so much that all of that, the fear and the self-doubt, can play into. And when that happens, it's reinforcing those false beliefs. And it's also reinforcing the fear, whether we're aware of it or not. So the idea of being safe, being safe, that you can trust yourself, that you can trust your intuition, you can trust what you think, you can trust how you feel, you can trust your needs and desires. All of that. You can trust your opinion. You can trust what you know. Like, I'm thinking now about like a work situation, especially when it's something that you've practiced or had experience with, being able to trust that you know this and learn to let go of having to question, trusting that you are recognizing that it is safe to trust what you already know. And part of the reason that we have difficulty with this throughout our lives generally is because even if we push our way through it and do the thing, if we're not conscious of that unfolding, then it doesn't give us the opportunity to recognize that it's safe. It doesn't give us the opportunity to basically rewire how our system responds to uncertainty, to doubt, to worry, to anxiousness. And one of the things, and this is a little off topic, but it's connected for sure. The anticipation of something positive can feel very similar to anxiety, right? Like, I'm anxious about this thing happening can be a positive thing, right? Like I'm feeling that anticipatory feeling. But there's a lot of similarity in terms of what's happening in our body between even excited and looking forward to something and anxiety that creates doubt, right? So when we are consciously moving through that process, or even upon reflection can recognize that, it helps retrain how our body responds to circumstances in which maybe we need to make a decision, or we have a desire about something, or when we need to be able to trust within ourselves. So maybe you reflect on a situation, something recent or a long time ago, in which you were in a situation and you recognize that you had a thought about it, that you had a desire for something, you had an idea or an opinion or a thought, or maybe even a sense of knowing of how to do something, or the best way to do it, or the right way to do it for the outcome that you wanted. But that doubt came in, that uncertainty popped up, that feeling in your body presented itself, which caused you to maybe pull back, to question. Reflect on a time in which that might have been the case. And then you recognize that it was okay, your intuition was correct, that it made sense that you thought, felt, or did the thing that you did, whatever it might be, but recognizing that. So again, maybe it's something you reflect on, but certainly pay attention to it going forward, because I can guarantee, and if you follow me for any length of time, you know that there's very, very, very little that I promise or guarantee. But I can feel confident in guaranteeing that if you're able to find, like if you reflect back on different types of circumstances, there will absolutely be something. No doubt about it. You may not fully trust it still, but there is something that you can go back to in which you had the knowledge, the opinion, the sense, the intuition, the knowing, the whatever it is. And regardless of the decision that you ended up making about it, recognizing that that thing that you knew, that you felt, that you sensed, that you understood, whatever it was, that it was correct, that it was accurate, that it was reasonable, and ultimately that it would have been safe, or it was safe to follow it. Because we need to be able to have experiences in which we can look at and say, following my intuition, or just moving forward with what I wanted, or trusting in myself, it made sense. The outcome was okay. Maybe even the outcome was good. Or, as is often the case, the outcome was even better than I could have anticipated. Because that does happen. And I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting that every time that you're able to do that, everything's going to turn out just beautifully. But more often than not, what creates the difficulty for us afterward isn't that we followed that. It's not that we weren't safe in being able to follow that. The ongoing doubt and the questioning comes from the questioning that we had at the time of the decision. And so when it turns out badly, or not in the way that we would have hoped, because we had that questioning, we can look at it and say, see, I was wrong. Even though you didn't necessarily follow with what you wanted, or maybe you did follow with what you wanted, but you can say, okay, I was wrong. I shouldn't have trusted myself. But is that really the case? Because is it possible that when you look back and the decision that you ended up making, was that decision fully because with confidence you trusted yourself? Or did you make that decision from a place of still doubting, questioning yourself afterward, and then potentially looking, because of the needing to reinforce that it's not safe to trust ourselves, because you're looking for any piece of evidence that it wasn't okay to trust yourself. And in a circumstance in which you may have followed your intuition or trusted yourself and made a decision and it really did not turn out well, while we can take that as evidence that we can't trust ourselves, that is not the reality, because there are going to be times that things do not turn out the way that we hope, in part because we can't control what somebody else is going to do. We can't control the people around us or the circumstances around us. So it is going to happen. But it is also true that there are times that you don't trust yourself and it doesn't turn out the way that you would have hoped. You end up doubting yourself and blaming yourself and all of those things, right? And yet we continue to not trust ourselves. So being conscious of how we're thinking about that is important. And it is part of a practice in healing. And it applies to so many different things in our everyday lives. Of course, in big things that are not everyday, but really in our everyday lives, that plays a role. So recognizing and practicing trusting in yourself, recognizing that living from that place of fear and worry does not actually control the outcome. It only causes you to live from a place of doubt and worry and fear and potentially some other things for a longer period of time. And I wish that there was a really quick or simple way of doing this, but it really is something that you have to practice over and over again. And it's still a work in progress for me. I certainly have not mastered it. I worry not as much as I used to. Not at all. But I worry. I am a worrier. I think about all different kinds of possibilities and outcomes. Some of them good, some of them not so much. But the more we practice, the more we recognize that that it is safe to be in this space, that it is safe to trust yourself. And even when we're not coming from that place specifically, the more practice we have, the easier it is to come back to that place of presence. In a sense, homeostasis, in a way. It's easier to come back to a place where you can feel more ease because you've had that practice. So I hope you have found this helpful. I'd love to hear from you in the comments, different things in terms of what came up for you through this video and through the practice. Share whatever comes to mind. Thanks so much for being here. I look forward to seeing you next time.